Is it go time?
It is go time. So, hello there, YouTubers. My name is Travis. I'm here with Jesse Stevenson, owner of Stevenson Speed Shop in Portland, Oregon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We're here today to showcase a new video series. We are going to attempt to build a bike, a HOBBIT, to participate in the upcoming Baker's Dozen run from New York to Austin, Texas this summer.
So let's start with going over what, for those of you that are new, what exactly the Baker's Dozen run is going to actually be this year. So would you like to go over some of the rules of the participation of a said event?
Yes, so the event's a little different, not to be associated with the pinball runs of the past. This year for Baker's Dozen run, there are going to be 13 teams, and a team can be up to 5 people.
That's a Baker's Dozen.
That is a Baker's Dozen. 13 teams riding from New York to Austin, Texas, with checkpoints every night. In addition, so a team can be up to 5 people, but only 2 riders are allowed on the bike at any given day. There's also, in addition to those 13 teams, going to be some solo riders and some people competing in a kind of poker chip style kind of run, concurrent with the rest of the riders. My goal for this is to have a team and just participate and have fun.
Do you actually have a team yet?
No. If you'd like to be on my team, write to me leave a comment below if you're on the East Coast and you have access to a car, or you're willing to split the cost of a one-way rental with me. Probably the latter for easiness sake. But that's still up in the air. But what is kind of solid right now is the plans to build this bike. And so currently, right now, the plan is Jesse and I are going to build this Honda HOBBIT here in Portland, Oregon. Build it for, most importantly, reliability, but also to be able to be at speed. And then I'm going to ship it to the East Coast to participate in the run.
For the majority of what we're going to be putting together, there's going to be a series of videos that basically showcase what it takes for us to take this well-worn and I would say original condition HOBBIT is a fair way to say it. It has most of its original parts in original wear, and turning it into a vehicle that could do up to 250 miles a day at roughly 55 miles an hour at a clip.
Yep.
For the entire time. So, and this will be 8 days in a row? 8-day event?
It's going to be, I believe, 9 or 10. There's a rest day in Pensacola, Florida, where there's no riding, so they added that in there.
So then the day after is going to be the hangover part of the event.
Most likely so.
Okay.
Yeah. But in total, I expect to be riding this thing for about 1,800 to 1,900 miles. Total.
So just to kind of give people that are new to this or aren't fully aware of what the goals are, is that we have to take a almost 40-year-old original condition shitty moped that was of questionable content originally, and then make it into a vehicle that can sustain 25 miles an hour over its original manufactured top speed for 200 miles at a time for 10 straight days. So not the simplest task in the world, but it's not really undoable. You just have to approach it with a sense of realistic expectations and goals. So that is what we've done in the pre-planning stages, which is what we'll be going over today. What we're going to do in the subsequent weeks is go over the actual construction of taking this bike from what it currently sits at, which we'll show pictures of that in a minute, but to what is going to be his mighty steed for the total bit, and maybe yours too if you sign up for Team
Travis tutorial for The baker's dozen run.
Now, if you're really interested in helping him out with this, the name could be changed. It could be Team Travis Tutorial Prevents Also Your Bad Idea. Then Team Travis Tutorial Presents Ruining Your Vacation. So there are plenty of options there. So, but we're going to primarily focus on this video series with not the logistics of handling the event itself, but just getting the bike prepared. So we're going to go down a quick checklist of what our actual goals are for the vehicle, and then we're going to go on how we're going to achieve those goals in the upcoming weeks.
All right, very good. So we're in kissing distance. And so now we can kind of outline specifically the parts and some of the methodologies we're going to employ to make this Honda HOBBIT somewhat reliable. So
let's start with the top of the page. Here's our goals of the project. Now, to start with, there's the idealistic goals of the project, and then there are the what can we actually accomplish goals of the project. And so the idealistic goals of the project is to crush thine enemies as you walk across the country winning day after day. So crushing enemies, good. It's a good first goal. Now, that the rules of the pinball run itself on this year, sorry, not the pinball run, my mistake, is a little bit, it's a cumulative race over 2 separate years. So from beginning to end, it will be completely across the country, but just for the first year, it is going to be from
New York to Austin, Texas.
Okay, so each individual day is a timed race. So it is about cumulative miles done each day. Everybody has the same starting point and the same ending point. How you get there is up to you. But whoever crosses the line first gets, it's a timed race for the day. So over the course of the days, whoever has the total cumulative lowest time is going to be the overall winner of the first half of this particular race.
Yep.
So it's not just about completing the race, it's about doing it within a time frame. Now there is an actual end time frame, which is going to be 24 hours from the start of the day.
Yes.
And that has actually disqualified a lot of teams in the past because
You gotta be there by 10 a.m. Yeah.
you got to be at the next start location by 10 a.m., which is the start of the next day. So if you're rolling in at 9:48, you got 10 minutes to gas up and get going again. Probably not the best strategy. Not one that I would take, but other teams have had to make bolder decisions than I have. So the actual plan is to basically finish each day with the smallest amount of mechanical issues and reliability that we can. I've noticed in the past couple of years, because this is not my first rodeo, if you will, of doing this, and I've sponsored a handful of teams in the past, and I followed it pretty regularly and helped out other teams as well. So the idea of not just getting there the fastest seems to be kind of an interesting gamble, because I've seen other teams do 70 miles an hour across the screaming salt flats of the middle of like corn-laden nowhere till they hit one hill, and then the entire motor explodes into pieces and they lose a day behind. So it's not always the best to just try to build the fastest bike. So we're trying to go with the most reliable bike, but you can't just go with the most reliable bike that does 35 miles an hour, because if you're going to do 250 miles a day, you probably don't want to be riding the thing 18 hours. So you've got to make a happy medium of a bike. So our actual goals, write this down, are going to be a sustained top speed of 55 miles an hour. Sustained. Second goal is not having to stop for fuel as much as humanly possible. So we're going to attack that in 2 different ways, but not having to get a bike that only gets 20 miles per tank of gas is also a pretty heavy goal of ours, because again, time, and you'll waste a lot of time just filling it back up with gas. Third thing is, and this is the actual main goal, is making the bike reliable as possible. You can be a little bit slower than the next person, but if you don't break down or you don't have to stop for gas every hour, then you're going to make up a lot of time that you could otherwise. The guy in front of you might be doing an average of 60 miles an hour on an open flat, but if he has to break down or stop for gas more frequently than you, you're going to pass him. So reliability, fuel mileage, and sustained actual miles per hour. The fourth thing on our list is going to be more of a thing for him and whoever his glorious partner is going to be, is going to be making the bike somewhat comfortable for doing this, because as I just mentioned, your day probably going to be somewhere around like 8 to 12 hours long of riding this bike. So making it a little bit more comfortable during the duration of that is probably going to be key. So we're going to skip on our flat bars, and we're going to skip on our like Brooks bicycle seats for this event. So that's going to be our fourth goal. It's not going to be as high on the list as these other things, but it is one thing that has to be concerned with. The other thing that we have to do is not just this is motor, this is motor, this is mostly motor. That's frame stuff, but we also need to make sure that the bike can stop and be somewhat safe while doing all these things. So upgrading the suspension, which is also going to go towards comfort, but make sure the brakes are also up to snuff. So we'll be doing a disc brake conversion on this just to make sure that at 55 we can bring a bike back down to a reasonable speed without being dangerous. So those are our 5 main goals for this. So now that we know what our 5 goals are, let's go over how we're going to achieve our goals.
All right, so we laid out our 5 goals, and now we can specifically talk about the build.
So I think the most important thing to realize that when you're making decisions on what and how to do, like how to meet the goals that we have, you have to look at the bike that we're starting with. And since Hobbits are not the best in the world, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that. And I'm going to say, hey haters, Anyways, as we were getting ready to talk about in the previous section of this film, before this thing fell down and proved that we might be incapable of actually putting together a full running bike, we were going to talk about how we're going to magically transform one crappy yellow Hobbit into a vehicle of mass destruction that will rule this game to the end of time. So, what we had to start with, and what usually ends up being the most issues with reliability and speed, is going to be the motor and drivetrain. So we're going to take everything that's on here, throw 90% of it away, and replace the rest of it with components that hopefully will hook up for what we're trying to do. So, to meet our required goals, we're going to have to hit 2 physical things. We got to get the RPMs up, and we got to get the transmission tuned. So to do that, we are going to start with the simplest and most reliable for the job without giving me too many fusses. It's going to be basing this whole job off of the DR kit. The classic, the one, the only, cast iron, stupid exhaust port shaped, run forever, except for over 5,000 miles until they get oblong shape. But the DR kit, they typically have a lifespan of about, and this is what my understanding is since I've replaced like 7 of them this year from having ovalized shaped cylinders, but they have about 5,000 miles on them, and you got to throw them away.
Because they're out of round.
Yeah, they physically wear themselves out completely, and that's something that DR as a company does with also their vintage scooter kits. So this is a top-down problem of their company, so hats off to them for making a decent cylinder for a short period of time, but it doesn't cost a whole lot, so meh.
And this is a nice cast iron kit.
Yeah,
also.
So if we decide to smear the inside of this thing as hard as humanly possible in a cornfield in the middle of nowhere, we can probably rub it out with some uric acid and call it a day. Mm-hmm. So unlike your high-powered Nicosil-lined aluminum cylinders, the better cooling efficiency and the higher specific output, they have a tendency to survive a little bit longer under high loads and stresses. So we're going with DR kit. Second thing is Hobbits love to snap crankshafts in half, so a crank of reasonable quality. Crank! That's the other main issue that Hobbits have, is that they decide to just throw the crankshaft directly down the street. So,
well, the magneto side will bend, right?
They all bend.
Yeah.
It's, what the main issue that you have with taking a bike that had a maximum speed of 30 miles an hour-ish, and it's originally manufactured, is that if you don't change the gearing but you make it do 55, you've almost doubled its actual RPM window that it operates in. When you do that, the amount of force that goes up on the crankshaft and all the other things that rotate isn't a linear scale upwards. It's a exponential scale, so the amount of force that is magically transferred to that crankshaft isn't linear. Mm-hmm. So, aka, we need a better crankshaft. Also, by the time you put a better transmission inside of the Hobbit, it puts a hell of a lot more force on the side of the crankshaft. So again, throws it off. Can't have that. Third thing is going to be having CDI. That is a capacitive discharge ignition. That is to replace the factory points on a Hobbit. Now, I will say that a Hobbit, as a factory bike, compared to all of the other bikes, their factory point system is pretty fucking robust. But it does have a couple issues, and one of them is I don't feel like dealing with points wearing out because, as we mentioned at the beginning of this thing, 2,000 miles in 10 days. So just the reliability of a CDI. Now, I realize that for most of us, the reliability of a CDI kind of comes down to the quality of the CDI. So Honda actually has this thing where they made these bikes for a long time and they had factory CDIs. So we're going to be getting a factory CDI and we're going to be putting a Yamaha jog box on it, and that should take care of all of our ignition related issues. The fun side effect of that is that now we'll actually have lights because he gets inevitably stuck driving in the middle of nowhere at night. He would like to have that extra 60 watt of lighting power.
Yep.
So this is one of our key things that make these things reliable. So DR kit, that'll get us up to the RPM we need. It'll get us the reliability, the cooling cast iron, and the seizability factor in. Better crank, good CDI. Factory CDI, Yamaha jog box, down the list.
Also, that jog box, because it has a built-in curve, will...
Some of them do.
Okay.
Not all of them do, because you can get a lot of jog boxes that are just boxes off the internet.
Right.
That I bought for $12 on
eBay.
Joe Blow's Chinese website,
Yeah.
and it ain't got no curve.
Right.
Or it's got a curve, but it curves the wrong direction. So
Fair enough. I feel like a CDI, a jog box with a curve, that'll at least help with cooling a little bit, right?
yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't really help with cooling in the sense that it retards the timing back to the point where it makes the motor run cooler. What it does is it allows you to set the at full throttle ignition timing where you want it to be so that the motor stays running at the temperatures it should be running, and then at lower RPMs it's advanced enough that it actually has some power still.
Mm-hmm.
The CVT transmissions mean that doesn't really end up being much of a problem, but if you're running like a Minarelli or something like that and you're kind of trying to run one gear from beginning to end, it's nice having the power curve.
Right.
Because otherwise you've got this issue where you have to like make a decision over having low RPM torque and having a top speed overheating, or having your top speed being good and then having no low RPM torque. So it's an issue. But with CVTs, not as much.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can kind of just tune around it so it just jumps into that, stays there, and just works at 1 RPM all the time. So it's not a big deal. Talk to the Frenchies. They love all that shit. So the other thing we got to do is still a belt drive bike. That's annoying, but CVTs are pretty cool. So where we do have a trade-in reliability from not being a simple gear to chain driven like an E50 or a Minarelli based motor, we do have a belt in there. So the belt wear is going to be a thing, but that's just a simple changing it out. But the transmissions on a stock Hobbit, not my favorite. So it was an early prototype sort of situation of a CVT. They had all the right ideas there, they just had them put together all wrong. So as you note by there never ever being another scooter ever built that has the same transmission as a Hobbit. So they improved it a little bit afterwards. But as a result, though, we're going to have to go with, probably going to try the Trick Metric.
Oh, really? Not the TJT?
Well, honestly, the TJT, for what it costs, is kind of a shit product because it's not really meant for this thing. So when you buy the TJT, you run into 5 problems immediately. One is they don't fit. Secondly, god damn it doesn't fit. Third, I have to buy more parts because it doesn't fit. And then fourthly, it didn't even come with all the parts that I needed when I bought all the extra parts. God damn it. So we're going to go out on a limb here and just try a couple other parts just because I put on enough TJTs to know that they're frustrating. They do work after like 3 hours of grinding on everything and making sure that you order the extra bunch of parts, but I would prefer not to do that, and so we're going to go with the Trick Metric one. Plus, extra bonus, it's cheaper. So even if it has the same level of reliability and then costs me less money, and then also I don't have to buy extra shit and also modify all the extra stuff that I buy, perfect.
Sure.
So the other thing we're going to do is, while the stock Honda Carburetor is fine for the most part, and we've built plenty of bikes that run these stock stupid carburetor.
Mhm.
They do have some finicky issues, but one of the main issues we have for them is the location of them means that you can't just clean it very easily on the side of the road. Secondly, I need to actually be able to get up to a higher RPM sustained without stressing out the carburetor and the motor, so we're going to need a larger carburetor. Third, they sometimes just decide to stop working in the middle of working, so I just don't want to avoid the entire situation. So we are going with a VM20. Now, there's going to be a lot of fanboys out there that talk about whatever carburetor they think is the best for whatever application. Like, I had a PHBG and it was just fine. And I had an OKO carburetor and it was just okay. But the problem is that the PHBGs are incredibly finicky when it comes to temperature changes, altitude changes, no changes at all, but I don't want to work anymore. So, and I will give the Lordo a lot of credit because they do offer a wide variety of internal parts that you can change out, but that's great because I actually have to change the internal parts out of them all the time if the temperature changes 40 degrees. So the VM20 is just generally more reliable for that.
Mm-hmm.
Plus the VM20 is a flange mount carb with a rubber O-ring. As a PHBG is either going to be a clamp mount style carburetor or it's going to be a rubber hose mount style carburetor. And one thing I would like to eliminate is the potential of the rubber hose giving out in the middle of nowhere.
Because gasoline breaks down everything.
Well, the gasoline not specifically, but also the ethanol that's added in there, because it wasn't bad enough that gasoline breaks down half of the chemicals in the world, the ethanol breaks down the other half of the chemicals in the world. So the VM20, it's a lot more reliable as far as the clamping on system. I like it better. I'll build an intake. If we can't buy the cast one from 1977, maybe they'll be in stock. Maybe they'll ship it in some reasonable time frame. But we're going to go with that. Nothing else, we're going to build an intake. So, but we're going to go with the stock flat reeds because we don't really need to have a big 4-pedal reed on this. We just need to sustain 55. We don't need to get to 55 as fast as a bike that's, say, racing or just around town because it's fun. We just need it to get to 55 and stay at 55 all day long. When you're in town, it's a light to light race.
Mm-hmm.
You're not really racing light to light.
Nope.
We're not looking at fractions of a second per lap here. That would be my race bike.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I need to get it to just a maintained speed so that the RPMs of the motor aren't up to a point where it's going to wear everything out really fast. The constant heat of the engine is well within the range that it doesn't really get over 350 on a flat.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of my approachable goal here. I don't want to have a motor that's running at 380, 390 all the time because if it starts to give me a problem, it starts creeping up beyond that. It doesn't give me a huge window before we're having to sand our cylinder in a field. So we're trying to do the fuel economy also being the factor in why I'm going to go with the flat reeds. It's just going to use a lot less gas.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is the PHBG carburetors use a lot more fuel when compared to like a VM20. I don't know why, they just seem to. But the other factors with this is that these are going to be cheaper and it's already on the motor. So all we have to do is just change the reeds out, call it a day. Mm-hmm. And I do like the fact that a HOBBIT factory has a rubber lined reed block so that you don't have to worry about gasket failure there. So I can just build a flat metal flange if we can't buy the metric one or the one from 77 for mounting this on here. Plus we're going to have to mount the carburetor in a location that allows us to get to it. I have some plans for that, but hopefully we can just do it without cutting big holes in the frame.
Yep.
Or cutting the frame out completely and re-welding a frame around it. But so
Rear pulley?
yes. So VM20 is going to be our carburetor selection. Flat reeds with Boyesen reeds or carbon fiber reeds or whatever reeds I feel like getting.
Mm-hmm.
No, probably going to be a 0.3 millimeter carbon fiber reed. Because again, don't really care about acceleration a huge amount. CVT is going to take care of most of that, and this ain't a light to light race. It's an endurance race. It's more of a grueling death march, if you will. But here's the fun trick. I let him ride the bike. I just do this part because the riding it doesn't really sound that fun to me. So the other thing we're going to have to deal with is we have to use, and talking about having a maintained temperature of about 350, what we're going to do, and this is, we're getting to some of the oddball stuff here, but we are going to use a derby head. So with I believe that the DR kit is and I don't quote me on this because I don't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say that it is a 44 millimeter diameter kit, whereas the Derby heads for the metric kits are going to be a 47 millimeter diameter kit. But anyways, we're going to use a Derby head, and if we just get a stock Derby flat reed head or a piston port, it doesn't matter. But I'm going with the ones that hopefully I can just buy off the internet instead of tracking one down and then doing a bunch of machine work to it, which I can do, but it sounds annoying. The things we're going to be doing with the Derby head: one, lot larger cooling surface to allow this to work a lot better at maintainable speeds. Because the stock Hobbit head, while works fine, it doesn't really shed as much heat as I'd like to shed away from this thing. The one thing with the DR kit is they absorb a lot of heat and they maintain it for a long time because it's cast iron. It doesn't have the same thermal flow rate through it as other things. Its Q dot's a little bit lower, so we're gonna have the Derby head. And one of the things I'm going to do with this bike, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that a DR kit, the decompression channel is going to be welded completely shut.
Yep. No decomp.
We're going to not run a decomp on here. One, the distance between the edge of the piston, or the bore edge, to the channel that runs around the outside of it on the Derby head is like 2 millimeters or some shit. And the likelihood of it bleeding air from the edge of the combustion chamber into that channel is pretty high. Causes a lot of heat spikes. Also, random failures in the head gasket, leaks like 0.5 millimeter across there. So, just going to eliminate the whole thing by weld shut. That's also going to say, well, how do you start it? I got that one covered. Don't worry. So, that's going to be our plan for cooling. The next thing is the transmission. So, the transmission is going to be a special thing. Now, again, we talked about having the trip metric variator. Now we're going to leave the stock rear pulley on here. There's a couple options for the rear pulleys on these. You can go with the stock one. You can go with a Camino rear pulley, which has a little bit more movement. The way that the guide pins work inside of there are a little bit nicer. It's a little bit easier to deal with than the stock American Hobbit style. There's also Motomatic makes their particular little GY6 adapted, minerally horizontal, whatever you want to call it, adapted piece. I've used a couple of those. Maybe I need to play with them some more, but that they have a couple things that I don't like about them. One of them is with a stock front transmission, the variator pulley face moves towards the inside of the frame. That keeps the belt aligned with the back stock pulley because the outer cheek is fixed and the inner cheek slides towards the inside of the frame. With the GY6 style scooter adapted rear pulley, the outer cheek is the movable cheek and the inner cheek is the fixed cheek, which means that when the bike gets to speed, the belt is no longer running true. It's running at an angle because the inside and the front moves towards the inside of the frame and the back moves to the outside of the frame. So what happens is I got a belt that's not running true anymore, and since the bike's going to be running basically at full throttle for thousands of miles in a row, I'd like to have the belt running true while it does that so that it's less likely to wear the belt out and leave us in the field again. So we're going to be using a stock variator rear transmission or maybe a Camino one if we can get a hold of one. Doubt I can get a hold of one. Not going to rely on it. Ain't going to hold my hand.
Are we going to change the springs in the stock one?
What we're going to do is we're going to tune it to see whatever works the best.
Okay.
They sell a whole bunch of aftermarket rear pulley springs for these things, but god damn it, they don't work. They don't fit. They keep selling them and they don't fit. They've never fit.
Supposedly that guy Mopegan made some that they're like orange and they seem to work okay. All right. Well, okay.
Cool. Find me one.
Yeah, they are hard to find.
Yeah. So, I mean, if that is true, fine.
Sure.
I don't have one.
Yeah.
And I've never seen one and I've never heard of one. And I research this stuff for a living.
Yeah.
So I'll probably go ahead and say I ain't going to get one. But I can tell you right now, the ones they sell on 1977, the ones they sell on trees, they don't fit. They say that they fit, but when you actually put it in there, it spring binds halfway down because the coils expand. They hit the outside of the pulley interior and then they don't move anymore. They don't work. So what I'm probably going to do is take it apart, clean it up, maybe use a different spring, probably not though, and just put it back together with fresh grease and fresh bearings and all the other shit that we have to go through to make sure this thing actually works. So that is going to be our rear transmission. The front transmission is going to be trick metric variator because probably going to be the easiest one. You can't use the stock one. They don't have enough motion, range of motion is the thing. So the rear pulleys on the Hobbit, and bless their little hearts, they gave them a lot more motion than they really needed for the factory front. So that's always been one of the big modifications, is to notch your variator to make it more power, or it allows the pulley to move in further. It gives you a higher range of the variator, like top to bottom. But if you just buy the other variator, it does the same thing, so whatever. And that is so that we can get the RPMs that this is going to run with the RPMs that this thing will allow us to have the range to do with the rear modified a little bit. We're not going to really need a different pulley in the back because we don't need any more acceleration. Because the rear GY6 pulley has more range in it than the front variator will allow anyways. So when I messed around with them in the past, you kind of have to make this weird balance between like it riding all the way at the top and riding all the way at the bottom. And so what we're going to do with the back is variator here, stock rear pulley but fixed and stuff, and then the clutch is the other thing that we're going to do some work on. So
if you're okay talking about this in the early stages, that's
not yet, but
okay.
But we're going to do some fun stuff with the clutch here. It's going to be a little interesting, so we'll get to that later. So be aware, it ain't going to be a stock clutch in this thing, and partly it's because I hate the starter clutches in these things. They do a couple things I don't like. One, if we don't have a decompression cable on here, or a decomp channel, it's going to make it hard to start. So we can't have them anyways. They won't really work very well. You can do it. They will get to lock up, but it's tricky, and they're just kind of frustrating. The other reason is that they don't allow you to let the clutch transmission slip, because you can put really heavy clutch springs in the front for the clutch, primary clutch, but as soon as the bike is rolling at 5 miles an hour, the starter clutches lock up anyways, so it defeats all purpose of having that. So we're just not going to have starter clutch shoes in this thing. So now I realize that most people go, how are you going to start it? And go, well, we'll buy a pull start. We ain't doing that either. So I got other plans, and you'll just come to find out those in the later stages of these videos. But don't worry about that for right now. Just let it be known that there will be a clutch solution that is unique and you haven't seen it before, but it will be ours. So that's basically how we're going to get the drivetrain to work. Now the bike that we're using already has a Proma pipe on it. Those pipes work great, but going back to the fifth thing on the first list, which was rider comfort for the day, we're probably going to want a pipe that doesn't sound like a rattly tin box the entire time. So what we're going to do is, and they also have kind of weird RPM limit. They just kind of shut off. So
as mid-range pipe is expected to.
Yeah. So they've got a lower RPM window that they'll operate in. So we're just going to buy the Treats black destroyer copy pipe. The other thing is that the Promo pipes, while they're pretty fine, they are a little tinny. They do fall apart. The mounting flange is half the thickness that it needs to be to even not bend on the first installation of the pipe.
Yeah.
The material fatigues really quickly.
Right.
For the mounting brackets under the bottom. So what happens is over 1,000 or 2,000 miles in constant vibration of running at full throttle all day long, they're just going to snap off. And I don't feel like dealing with it.
Yeah. So, and every single other team who's run a circuit style pipe for previous pinball runs has had to weld and weld and weld.
Right. And if you take a bike or take a pipe, the metal has fatigued to the point where it's cracked, you can't weld it again because the metal's fatigued, and then it just breaks next to the weld because the heating of it for re-welding it, the original failure, the propagation of the cracks in the material fails it immediately. Plus, welding on top of an already used pipe, you don't really get a good weld because the inside of the pipe is filled with garbage. So it doesn't really work the way it is. So we're going to go with the cheap Treats black pipe they sell. The reason is it's got a much hardier mounting flange. It mounts in the back. It's out of the way. Doesn't seem to have the issues of breaking down at the period of time that we need. I have had a bunch of these do break after like years of work.
Right.
And we had a couple of the early ones on some of the Tomoses break all the time in the front, but again, it goes back to if it breaks the first time, you can't weld it back together because the material's fatigued around it and it just breaks next to what you just welded on there. So stop doing that, people. So That's going to be our pipe, and that also has a much higher RPM window. Plus, it's a lot smoother. The promo pipe works okay on a Hobbit because it's variated, but if you try to put a promo pipe on like an E50 or something, you realize that it's got a really, really dumb power band. It basically is shaped like a square wave, so it goes burp, 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 and it shuts off early. It gives you really weird like carburetor issues like below where it actually starts to come on. So we're just not going to use it. That's going to be roughly what we're going to do for the motor and the drivetrain. There's going to be a lot of other little tricks and things like that we do as we're showing you as we're building the thing. But that's kind of roughly the build that we're going for on this and the reasons why. So that should cover everything else. Now that is going to take care of like 80% of the reliability issues, because the motor and the drivetrain are what usually causes a bike to fail regularly on these events, but the rest of the bike is also points of modes of failure. The brakes, the just wearing out tires, having rims.
Subframe.
Yeah, the subframe braking is another big issue with Hobbits over time. There's like areas where they always have it stress-induced cracks where they all break. So we're going to be going through reinforcing a lot of that stuff. We're going to be taking the rear transmission apart, new bearing seals, everything. All the little stuff that most people never actually do when they put together pinball run bikes. I don't know that for certain, but all the ones that I've personally seen, which I haven't seen a lot of, but stuff that I'm going to do to make sure that this thing can be as reliable as possible is just, making sure that it has a true wheel, which is just going to make things work out a lot nicer, I think, over time.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the basics of this. But welding the subframe, the front brake is going to be a disc brake. It's going to have a whole new fork on it, so you're just going to take that off, throw that away. And so that's going to take care of the front brake, suspension, wheel, all that stuff, because it's going to have a dirt bike rim on it, probably an RM80 or whatever, KX85, who knows. But it's going to have a much stouter wheel on it. And the other thing is when you take these bikes and they were meant to go a certain speed, you make them go almost twice that speed. When you go hitting potholes, the amount of force is significantly higher. And the stock rims and the stock spoke diameters, they don't really put up with that as well, so you end up with a lot of bent wheels. Hobbits, and specifically all the Japanese manufacturers, have really bad spokes for some reason, and they all have bent rims at this point, like just wildly bent. So we're going to probably end up relacing and putting a different rim on the back. Probably one of the things we're going to have to do. You have to have the Hobbit brakes in the back because it's a Hobbit and you can't really get away from it because of the hub design. But we can do a lot to mitigate its just miserableness.
Right.
So we're going to do away with a lot of that as far as the way that they just kind of don't work or they drag all the time or all the usual Hobbit stuff that I hate. Mm-hmm. We're going to try to mitigate as much as possible, actually accentuating the nice features of a Hobbit and throwing away all the garbage features of a Hobbit that I hate. So other things that we're going to be doing is clearly going to use good tires, clearly going to have all new cables, clearly going to have actual shocks in the back because, again, when you're going 55, the springs just ain't quite enough to cover the difference,
right.
And
springs in a tube.
Springs in a tube, yeah. And no guarantee that the springs are good still and that the tubes are straight. Mm-hmm. So, and it's not expensive to go buy some cheap pit bike shocks for the back. So we're going to be putting some sort of cheap pit bike shocks in the back that have dampening, like the future. So there's a lot of little things like that. We're probably going to end up with, we have a bunch of forks we're going to choose from. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try not to use EBR forks, but it might just come down to we just use EBR forks. I don't like EBR forks, but they're the ones that they sell.
They're more, in your opinion, probably more of a stock replacement rather than an actual performance fork, right? Yeah. They're
missing a handful of parts inside of them that make them a real fork. Like bushings.
Right.
Or oil.
Yeah. There's some that take oil. There's some hydro forks.
Yeah. They put oil in them, but that doesn't make them a hydro fork. It just means it's a spring now in oil. Mm-hmm. Because it's very cute. If you take one apart, you realize they didn't put bushings in there for anything. And their idea of dampening isn't exactly they looked at a picture one day of what the inside of an old fork was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Forgot half of it before they drew their version of it. And then manufactured less than that. So they're not exactly my favorite.
Yeah.
So we're gonna try to avoid them if we can.
Try to avoid EBRs if we can, but if ideally I
There's
can get...
just so many of them sitting around. It's the same with biturbos. Like they're not
Right.
good.
They're just
everybody has like 4 of them sitting around, but nobody really wants them.
Right.
But they just kind of go, I already have it, so they put it on.
Yeah.
Looking at you bike over there with a biturbo on it, and then you just kind of go, well, I already put it on there, and then I'm going to leave it forever.
Yeah.
And then inevitably, like a month later, when the entire baffle goes rattling down the street, you go, nah, I'll just ride it like that for a while, because shame isn't something that you're taught as a child. So then you're just going to maintain that until the end of the heat death of the universe. And that's why we all had biturbos and EBR forks.
Yep, pretty much. Ideally, I'd love to even just get my hands on just a complete front end from something.
Yeah, the problem is that the dirt bike conversions all have dirt bike fork geometry, which what you would like to do, and the American Cruiser was built for a reason, and it's because the frame geometry on the front forks of one of these, like a chopper, is built to just go in a straight line forever, and they don't like corners, but we're not doing corners. We're going in a straight line forever. So you can take your hand off the bars because the trail and rake numbers mean that it auto balances because of the goofy caster shape on those things, and they just stay going forward. Whereas if you have a more aggressive angle and rake numbers, they want to tilt backwards, which makes them better for corners but less stable at speed in a straight line. But dirt bikes are meant to go over logs and shit, so what they need is to not have accidental negative trail numbers when they're jumping over like a 10-inch tall log. Otherwise, the forks fold. So when you adapt a dirt bike to a moped, then you've got wildly goofy rake and trail numbers that everybody just goes meh and rides anyways because mopeds, who gives a shit?
Right.
But that's why some of the racer guys get all their hard-ons from like, I got vintage Paoli forks, or I got ones out of an RS50, and those are great because they have a reasonable frame geometry for what you're trying to do on a moped while having dampening in like movement that actually moves up and down at some reasonable level. So whereas stock forks are 100% springs and tubes, except for like apparently the Indians and like some of the Mark II Magnums and like
some of the Generals and
some oddball bikes, but like the majority of them are plastic guides with springs and tubes, and that's it.
Yeah.
So we're going to upgrade that stuff because, again, grueling endurance race. So, and like any other endurance race standard, like iron ass people, it's not an endurance race of that quantity, but
it's a lot.
This man's done it.
Yeah.
So
I
probably on much jankier equipment that he'll be using this year. So,
I can guarantee you that's definitely the case.
True.
I would love, I know you have no interest in this list, I'd love to get my hands on a spare MB5 front end.
We have those sitting around. I have a spare MB5 front end.
Yeah, because that's your disc brake right there, and that's your,
Yeah,
it's a Comstar wheel that will hold up against potholes, and
Yeah, we wouldn't use that wheel, but
okay.
Yeah, I have one. We can do that. Hey guys, we might be doing an MB5 disc brake conversion on this one. Oh shit.
Maybe, yeah.
I think we just talked about it and we just won out.
Oh man.
I'm nothing better than free parts, am I right? That's right.
Yeah.
So there will be probably 2 Hobbit tanks on this bike just because more fuel. That's the other thing about like making mopeds faster is that while that's all fun and games, the gas tank doesn't get bigger when you do that. So your fuel range drops to like 20 miles an hour and it's not quite as fun as it used to be. So we're going to have to at least put 2 gallons of gas on this thing. A Hobbit tank is okay size, but it's going to need a little bit more.
I mean, on the Pinball Run 3, the Never DNF team, I mean, they had to pull over, once an hour to gas up.
Yeah, that's an unacceptable amount of fueling.
Yeah.
So what I would really like to do is put a long haul tank on this thing, call her good. We'll see what our budget allows on this.
Yeah,
one, so.
I'm somewhat open to that. That's definitely a little lower on the priority list for me, but I have a couple spare tanks kicking around, so So we'll see.
We might have to sacrifice a camel pack for this one.
Oh God. As in like just like gasoline on my pack.
Yeah. Don't confuse the tubes.
Or like I get rear-ended and I just explode. Like just like. Yeah, so we have.
What we're saying is that we're gonna have a killer ending to this video series.
It's gonna be amazing. It's gonna all go up in ball flames and blaze of glory. So. Okay, so that's all for now. Here's what to expect over the next couple months. We're going to be releasing videos about every 2 weeks, just about on the dot. This should be a 6 to 7 part series showcasing the teardown, the build-up, and then the testing and tuning of this Honda Hobbit.
So stay tuned for all of our successes and failures as we journey the construction of this particular endurance race Hobbit with us.
Exactly. All right, YouTube. Until next time.